Afternoon, Mark. How are you?
I'm fine, Steve, and looking at the screen, so do you. You look very good.
I've been running around like a blue-bottomed something or other.
Blue-arsed fly.
That would be the one. And I've had a very, very busy morning. So running around and actually just getting the opportunity to sit down and grab a cup of tea and have a catch up with you is welcome relief, my friend.
Excellent.
So anyway, what are we talking about today?
We've been talking to some length about our time in the Navy. But the Navy days came to an end. I was in just under 8 years. I'm not sure how long you were. You were a bit longer, weren't you?
Yep.
They came to an end. So just before the end, we would have had we would call the last foreign run ashore. I think we need to explain for people what a run ashore is, and then what do we mean by foreign? Because for me, I'm tempted not to include Gibraltar, which would have been the last out of the UK run ashore, but really it's part of the UK. So I'm going to go slightly further afield than that. What do you think? Can you remember? Because you can't remember much of your last run ashore on the Charybdis, supposedly. Do you remember much about your last foreign run ashore, and where was it?
It's probably a little bit different for me because my last foreign run ashore was when I was on foreign service, what they called LFS, Local Foreign Service. I was actually based out in Italy, down in Naples at the Allied Forces Southern Europe. And so that was my last foreign. When I finished there, I came back to the UK to HMS Mercury, the shore establishment in Petersfield for a very short space of time before joining HMS Southampton, which was my last ship. But she was in refit in Hebburn, not Heaven, but Hebburn in Newcastle, man. Well, I didn't know what she going on about late. So she was in refit up there, and I spent 6 months living in Hebburn, which is probably as foreign as you get, to be honest. But it was a fantastic time, and I dossed down with a wonderful old lady up there who took me under her wing because her son was ex-Navy as well, and all of this sort of stuff. She was an amazing old dear, and one of my biggest regrets is losing touch with her. So my actual last foreign was down in Naples, Italy.
But you weren't on a ship?
No, that was a foreign service. My last run ashore, I would have to say, was Gibraltar, even though you would disagree with being a foreign. Gib was my last port offshore the British Islands.
So how do you describe a run ashore? They're amazing things, really. It's a naval term, isn't it? You're not physically running, but you are ashore.
Sometimes you're physically running, Mark.
Get to the nearest pub. Or away from the nearest pub. Well, how would you describe it?
It's a mixed bag of emotions. It was, and I've got no idea what it's like now for matelots these days, sailors these days, but back in our day, you were always looking forward to your next run ashore. So there was always an expectation that when that first line got secured to the jetty and the Union flag was raised up the flagstaff on the... or the ensign, as it was in my case on one occasion, once that Union flag was raised up, you knew that it was game on, really. And then there was a whole build-up to it, wasn't there? So you'd get that run-in as you arrived at the jetty, and then you'd get that manic action going on around who was going to get ashore first. The whole mess deck would be smelling of aftershave and deodorant and talcum powder everywhere because the lads were getting ready to go ashore. It was quite a big thing, wasn't it?
Foo-foo powder was flying everywhere.
Foo dust, yeah.
I always remember when you got into a foreign port, one of the first things that used to come on was the money, because you put your money in to the ship's writer, who would then order ahead of time that we want this amount of money, and then they, or he, probably a team of them, had to count it out for each individual, and you got handed it, didn't you? We went to Djibouti a couple of times, and I don't know what it was. Either this money had been kept under the arse end of a camel for 30 years. It stank, the money. And I remember we opened it and it's like, wow. And we had to get all the underarm spray and deodorant to literally put it on the money. It reeked. And I put it in my wallet, and I can remember it smelled for some months afterwards. I don't know what it was. I didn't know money could smell like that.
There was lots of very mechanical processes that went in place, wasn't there? You think today where everything's done electronically and it's very, very smooth, and the level of bureaucratic red tape that you had to sort of jump through to get your money, to actually get ashore, to book any trip that you wanted to do or anything like that. And that was one of the good things, and I found this really useful when I was serving, was that I'd made a decision that whenever I went somewhere, whatever foreign part it was, I would try and book a trip so that I could actually go out and experience something of the area rather than just the closest bar, which everyone sort of gravitated to first off. So that was something that was a really good thing to do. But Gibraltar, as my last real run ashore from a ship, was always just a run to the hole in the wall, Charlie's place. And he used to have underwear on the back of the bar, like numerous pieces of underwear. Was it called the hole in the wall?
It was the hole in the wall. Charlie, it was a Gibraltarian who worked in the dockyard. He was so well known to the Navy guys. One of the nicest men you'll ever come across. I remember the first time I ever went there was on the Aurora. So when you went to Gibraltar, and it was just called the main drag, the main street. You came out the dockyard gates, and the first pub was the Donkey's Flip Flop or the Horseshoe, and then you'd go to the Barrel House and other places. Then there's these steps going up to the hole in the wall. And it was a little bar that you went down some steps, and it was like a big open space with the bar to your right, if I remember. And sailors used to go there. It was a well-known haunt. As the skin of the mess, I was dragged down there and they literally held an auction to sell me off. They probably did it to you, and I think it's to every other new lad who was in the first trip. It's just light-hearted fun. It was amazing. And he always supported it, Charlie. He always put up with the antics that we would get up to. I mean, drunken young lads. Never, as far as I'm aware, violent, just good fun. Me and a guy called Dell, we went down there and we kept ordering these brown cows. I think it was Baileys with crushed ice, and we just poured them over our heads. That's what we were doing. God knows why. So that was Charlie's.
For me, Gibraltar was always just that staggering pub crawl, really. You would start, as you say, as soon as you got out of the dockyard, the Donkey's Flip Flop, and you'd just work your way all the way through. But the hole in the wall was often the place that you'd end up or be carried out of or whatever it was. And it was always in good spirits, you're right. I don't ever recall having any issues at all with anything in Gib. I came into conflict with a couple of other ships once when I was in Italy, and when we were in Bahrain, I can remember things getting a little bit funky, and a big fight kicked off, and all I can remember is being on my hands and knees and crawling out, literally like one of those scenes from a movie. You've got the protagonist crawling out from the middle of the melee through the legs of everybody else that's scrapping, and that was me. I was just sort of working my way out of it and looking back going, whoo, it's all kicking off. I think I may have instigated some of that, but who knows? It's a long time ago now. Gib was definitely what I would call my last run. My last foreign was Italy. And Italy was fantastic. I mean, I lived out there for a year and a half. I've got incredibly good memories of some of the people that I worked with, some of whom I'm still in touch with. The place was wonderful. I loved the Italian way of life. I loved some of the Italian people that I lived and worked with. Real fun time. I got into way too much mischief while I was out there, which looking back, I think, idiot. But overall, I would say it was a really, really good time. And Naples itself is Struth. That's an interesting place to be anyway, because it was just bonkers. Crazy driving, Neapolitans who are renowned for some of their hot temper and all of this sort of thing. The Camorra, which is Neapolitan mafia. All sorts of funky stuff going on there. But it was, as a young man, it was a fantastic time out there. Thoroughly enjoyed myself.
I have been to Naples. When I led a school trip, we went to Sorrento, and we had a day trip to Herculaneum, and I was trying to explain the little bit of history I did know about when Nelson was there, Lady Hamilton causing a diplomatic incident, because he was a bit of a lad, old Nelson.
I loved it. I mean, I lived outside of Naples, probably around about, I don't know, it must have been about 17 miles or so, in a place called Lago Patria, which was like an enclosed community out there. And I actually worked on the island of Nisida, where Comnav South was based. So yeah, it was just great. Got the opportunity to travel around a bit as well. I rode my motorbike back from there, all the way through Italy and Geneva and the south of France, and through that Autoroute du Soleil, all the way back up to Dover, via Calais. But I also managed to tour around a little bit around the Amalfi Coast, which was really good fun. I think Amalfi Coast is just absolutely beautiful. And I sort of got myself involved in all sorts of aquatic activities. So I did diving out there and water skiing. And so the club swinger, the PTI, and I had to go across to Sicily to pick up a speedboat. And that was a real fun trip because he was a good lad. We had some quite good times. I tried to extend my time over there, but they wouldn't let me. I probably caused too much trouble while I was there. So they decided to send me back to Blighty.
Are you prepared to say how you got into trouble?
How did I get into trouble? I went AWOL, absent without leave. You had like a radius of 25 miles that you were only allowed between sort of watches, between being on duty, in case you had to be called back in. And I got on my motorbike and I rode all the way back up to England to see my wife, and then missed my flight to come back in time for my watch. And I got lifted when I stepped back into Naples airport by the regulating petty officer, who said, "I've been waiting to get you for so long." I was only adrift for a few days, but I think she'd had me in her sights because I'd sailed close to the wind for lots of reasons. I'd sort of ducked and dived. I was a bit of an Arthur Daly. Wheeled and dealed, had some good contacts in the Italian community. Scratch mine, I'll scratch yours, all of that sort of good stuff that Matalows get away with. And I think I was probably in her sights. And, it was fair cop, bang to rights. That's the way it goes.
Had you handed in your notice before then?
Yes, I think I had. Yes, I would have done. And if I hadn't, it was very shortly after then. So it was 18 months' notice. It was good sport. Nothing malicious. Hijinks. Blokes will be blokes. Boys will be boys. You sometimes get caught, don't you?
Well, it takes a thief to catch a thief. You did become a policeman, so...
Well, I did indeed. Poacher turned gamekeeper. That's the way I see it, mate. You've got to be able to straddle certain lines in life. And some of the best thief takers are ones that have straddled certain lines. I'm not suggesting I was the best thief taker at all, but I was competent.
Shall I tell you about my last one?
Go on, tell me.
I left the Charybdis, and my girlfriend and I went on a holiday to Tunisia, and we came back, and I was all tanned, and all the Matlows were jealous. Because they'd been in Plymouth and stuff. And then we found out that I had to go to the Gulf again. And this would have been about the fourth or fifth time I was going about the Gulf. And I was so adamant not to go. I pressured my girlfriend, now wife, to break my leg so I didn't have to go. And she said, "Oh, don't be stupid, just go." I said, I don't want to go. It's another bloody 6 months away. And I had my notice in. So this was my last trip abroad to the Gulf and came back. And it was on a ship unlike the other two. The Brazen, it was massive. And I wasn't even in the RO's mess, the radio operator's mess. There was not enough space. I had to go into the stoker's mess, which helped because when it came to clean ship, I always said I was going to go to the other place and help them, and I never did.
Good lad.
Yeah, absolutely. They used to call me Sunblessed because I loafed around a lot. The last run ashore was Malta. And I don't remember whether it was in fact planned before we left. It just seemed we're going Malta. And I knew a little bit about it from my love of history, that it was very tied to the British in the war. They had Faith, Hope and Charity, the 3 planes that were stationed there to fight off the Luftwaffe. And it was a very historical island. It was part of the Knights of St. John who had left Rhodes in the Middle Ages. So I was looking forward to it. What I didn't realise was we were the first British naval warship back since the British were told to leave the island in 1978 under Don Mintoff. It was said to us before we got there may be a few people looking as we enter Grand Harbour. They may be interested enough to come out and see the return of the Royal Navy. There were over 10,000 people on the water, let alone on Lascaris Wharf where we came in. So we came in, and as the Grand Harbour opens up, it's just a magnificent sight. Well, how would you describe it? It's a film set. It's where they filmed Games of Thrones. It was the height of summer, and we came in, and Lascaris Wharf had thousands of thousands. It made the news in the UK. And I remember my folks afterwards saying they think they saw me on the bridge wing. And I've looked at it, and I can't see myself. I think I actually was on the flag deck. But it's an amazing sight as we came in. All these people shouting. And Malta, I don't know what it is about Malta. I mean, you know Naples, how hot it can get in Naples. Well, Malta is halfway between Sicily and North Africa, but it's hotter than North Africa. It's got this unique climate. So with the heat wave currently out in the Mediterranean, I'd hate to think how hot it is in Malta. It's absolutely sweltering. It was an amazing reception. I would never forget it. And literally for about 4 or 5 days we were there, I had a couple of days off leave. A mate of mine, Paul Manchester, we booked into a little hotel with about 5 others just to the north towards Gozo, enjoyed the beach there and a few tavernas. But people, wherever we went, as soon as they found out we were sailors, we couldn't buy anything. It was literally a cliche. They kept buying us drinks, they kept buying, very hospitable. And they kept saying, "When are you coming back? Why don't you come back?" Most of the Maltese were hoping that we would return. So I bought myself a box suit in the style of David Sylvian. But it was not really for the heat, it was mainly for the British climate. It was more like tweed. But I was determined to wear this thing out. And one night in a disco, I nearly fainted. I was so hot. I was wearing this thing. I must have looked like a red-faced little prune, but I looked the dog's balls, if you know what I mean. And that was it. And apart from that, I don't really remember much.
Well, it was a long time ago now, Mark.
Well, you remember everything.
The point that you made about the Maltese people being so welcoming, I mean, Malta's a fantastic island. If anybody does listen to this and they've not visited Malta, I would highly recommend that you go and pay them a visit because they are a super people and they've got a fascinating history on that island. And if you're interested in any form of history, then it's fascinating their sort of background. So if anybody fancies where can I go in the Med, then go and have a look at Malta. It's a cracking little place. I found that pretty much everywhere that we went, in all of the years that I was in and all the foreigns that I did, that the people when we got there were really, really welcoming. I can't think of anywhere in particular. We went to some rough old places, didn't we? No disrespect to Pakistan, but Karachi is not the best run ashore. Djibouti is not the best run ashore. Even in places like that, the people were super and they were really, really friendly. And I think that in a world which has become very, very polarized and people are very set against each other, I think it's really good to remember that even in the wop-wops, in the middle of nowhere, people are good as a general rule. There are some really good people. We've spoken before about just wandering through the streets at night and haven't got a clue where you are, trying to find your ship and get back to the dockyard. You don't know where you are. You could be anywhere. Never any serious issues. I mean, stealing a Russian tank, that was one thing. That sort of brought a few issues. Doing deals for camels, that was another thing that sort of causes a few issues. All of this sort of stuff. But, generally,
I know what you mean. And that's the thing to bear in mind as well, is that a lot of the major places that we've been to are well known, like Sydney and places like that, because they're ports. But there's a lot of places you have to go to, you struggle to find on a map, or would want to go there as a tourist. In Malaysia, we went to a place called Lamut. We'd been to Singapore, went up to Lamut. I would never have gone there as a tourist. Loved it. Fantastic. The night food markets there are just spectacular. Often these little places that you would find now off trail are far better than the ones that are like the tourist traps. You would know this. If you go to Italy, go to little towns, just they're fantastic and often overlooked, certainly by foreign tourists. So that's one thing I've learned. Get off the beaten track.
Always trying to locate somebody. If you get chatting to somebody who's a local and say, where do you guys drink? Where do you guys go and have a knees up? And then they go, we actually go around here. You go, I'll come with you. And you end up in amongst all the locals, and being in amongst the locals is so much more fun.
Especially in Italy. We went on holiday once. We went to Vinci. This was only about 15 years ago, and they were still doing the walking up and down, looking at each other, the girls and boys with their chaperones. But we had a meal at a trattoria, or ostia. I'd never know the difference, you'll know. And it was full of locals, and they were loud. Literally, you couldn't hear yourself speak. It was so loud. There's only about 20 people in there, but wow, it's the loudest I've ever had a meal. Fantastic food, but you just couldn't hear yourself talk. Well, you would never do that if you was on a tourist package deal or something. You just wouldn't have gone there, and you're absolutely right.
I can echo that sentiment, because when I was living down in Naples, one of my sort of regular haunts, there was a couple. There was the place called the Castle, which was like a British pub. There was the Amelia Hotel, which was, again, frequented primarily by Americans and Brits, with a few Italians thrown in. But then just a little bit further out, there was Tony's restaurant. It was a pizza place, and you would just go there, man, and it was fantastic. And Tony was absolutely superb. And it was lots of Italian families, so you can imagine like the big families with little tiny kid in arms, through to great grandfather sat at the end of the table, sort of hunched over his glass of vino. Just a great vibe, a great feel, and it would just be a whole evening, from 6 o'clock onwards through to midnight. And there's music, and there's movement, and there's people, and there's kids, and there's noise, and you just get involved in all of that. And that was such a nice vibe. I really like that. I really like the Mediterranean lifestyle, to be honest. I love the way that they do it.
Yeah, especially in Italy.
I guess traditional family values, which I appreciate. They've got a care for the elders, which I also appreciate. I really do appreciate that. And having spent all morning running around trying to help out an 88-year-old woman here who's not getting the help that she needs from family, I really appreciate cultures like Italy that, when I was out there, held firm value for the elderly and what they could do with them and how they could help them.
Have you ever been back?
I haven't. I would like to go back to Capri, where my wife and I went. Because my wife came over a couple of times, I think, to see me, or at least once, maybe a couple of times. I'd like to go back with her to sort of walk some of those roads again. To be honest, I think it's highly unlikely. I mean, we can't get much further away from Europe, can we?
Without going back?
I wouldn't mind cruising back on the Cunard or something like that and just floating all the way back into Southampton. That would be a nice way of doing it. But again, who's got that? Well, I don't have that kind of money.
Well, we did that in the Navy. I mean, literally, there were cruises, especially when round the Med.
Grey Funnel Cruises, cruise line or something, wasn't it? Jack's Taxis. They were sleek grey warriors of death, Mark. That's what they were.
Well, not when I was on them. Dear viewer, did you know that we are also on Spotify? We also have an Instagram account for both our shorts and mediums. We'd love to see you over there.
give us a nudge. Come and see us. Come and visit us. Well, you sat on the toilet. You got 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Watch a medium while you're doing a long.
That's staying in. Right, okay, we'll finish there. Thank you.